The rain had just stopped when a battered white van pulled up outside a small house on the edge of Tacoma. Inside waited a battle-scarred Navy SEAL named Jack Walker and his old German shepherd, Ranger, both soldiers who had already lost too much. But today wasn't about war. It was about a little girl in a wheelchair who had already been returned 3 times, a child who didn't believe anyone could stay. When Jack opened the door and saw Emma Brooks for the first time, her bright yellow dress, her cautious eyes, that tiny turtle plush on her lap, he realized this wasn't another mission. It was redemption disguised as a 7-year-old with a broken spine and a braver heart than his. He thought he was saving her. He had no idea she'd be the one to teach him what staying really means. Before we begin, tell me, where are you listening from tonight? Drop your city in the comments, or simply type Amen for those who still believe some people are meant to stay. The rain had already soaked through Jack Walker's flannel shirt by the time he reached the gates of Harbor Ridge Children's Home. Tacoma's November drizzle was thin but relentless, the kind that clung to skin and memories alike. He stopped for a moment beside the rusted fence, adjusting the worn leash in his hand. Beside him, Ranger, his 7-year-old German shepherd, waited patiently, brown eyes scanning the gray courtyard ahead. Ranger was a massive dog, his sable and black coat glistening wet under the pale morning light. His muzzle was flecked with silver now, and a faint scar crossed the bridge of his nose, a reminder of a blast door in Mosul that hadn't opened fast enough. Yet his posture remained proud, ears forward, tail low, steady as always. Ranger had been a military K-9 once, trained to detect explosives, loyal to a fault. Now he was more than that. He was Jack's shadow, his heartbeat, the last surviving piece of a world that no longer existed. Jack glanced at the sign above the door. Stability, care, belonging. He almost turned around. It had been 2 years since he'd left the Navy SEALs, but the discipline never left him. Every decision still measured, every emotion still locked behind the same invisible walls that had kept him alive overseas. Yet today was different. Today, the ghosts had finally won. Cole's voice still echoed in his mind, the last transmission before the explosion. If anything happens to me, don't let my kid end up alone. Cole's daughter had died the same winter in a car crash with her mother. Jack never got to keep that promise. But maybe, somehow, this was his second chance. He took a breath, pushed open the door, and entered the building. Inside, the air smelled faintly of crayons and disinfectant. A woman behind the front desk looked up from her computer. She was Karen Lee, the social worker he had been emailing for weeks. In person, she looked exactly like her messages, precise, calm, but with a quiet strength behind the eyes. Karen was in her early 40s, short, with sleek black hair pulled into a low bun and almond skin that glowed even under fluorescent lights. Her tailored cardigan and ID badge hinted at order and professionalism, but the smile she offered was tired, the kind worn by people who cared too much for too long. "Mr. Walker?" she asked, glancing briefly at Ranger. "And this must be your partner." Jack nodded, his voice low and even. "He doesn't bite, not unless someone's hiding explosives." Karen's mouth curved into a faint smile. "I'll assume we're safe then. You're here to see Emma Brooks, correct?" "Yes, ma'am." Karen's smile faded slightly. "She's had a hard week. She's been through 3 failed placements. Please don't promise her anything you can't keep." Jack's gaze dropped. "I don't make promises anymore." That seemed to satisfy her. She stood, gesturing toward the hall. "Come with me!" They walked past walls plastered with children's drawings, crayon hearts, crooked houses, stick figures holding hands. Ranger's claws clicked softly against the linoleum, his nose twitching at every passing scent. Karen stopped before a door with a paper sign that read Art Room. "She's inside," she said. "She likes to draw when she's nervous. Don't expect her to look at you right away." Jack hesitated at the doorway, taking in the small room bathed in pale sunlight. A little girl sat by the window, a blanket over her legs, a sketchbook open in her lap. Her wheelchair was angled slightly toward the glass, rims wrapped with colorful galaxy tape that shimmered purple and blue. Emma Brooks was smaller than he expected. Delicate shoulders, narrow wrists, a nest of dark curls framing a face that seemed both soft and old at the same time. Her skin was the warm tan of someone who spent hours near sunlight, but not in it. And her eyes, wide, brown, and unflinching, carried the kind of watchfulness that no 7-year-old should know. On her lap rested a stuffed turtle with one loose button eye. Karen stepped forward first. "Emma, sweetheart, this is Mr. Walker. He and Ranger came to meet you today." Emma didn't look up. Her pencil scratched quietly across the page. "Didn't they all?" Karen's expression flickered, but she said nothing. Jack crouched down, bringing himself to Emma's level. Ranger followed suit, sitting neatly beside him. "Hi, Emma," Jack said softly. "I'm Jack, and this big guy here is Ranger." The girl's eyes flicked down to the dog. "He's big." "Yeah," Jack said. "He used to think he ran the Navy. Now he mostly runs the couch." That earned the faintest twitch at the corner of her mouth. But the moment passed quickly. She studied his boots, mud-stained military issue. Then her eyes moved up to his face, the close-cropped hair just beginning to gray, the faint beard shadow along his jaw, the small scar slicing his left eyebrow. She took him in the way soldiers assess a new battlefield, quietly, completely. Finally, she said, "You look like you get tired easy." Jack blinked. "I don't." "Everyone says that," she murmured. Then, still without looking up, she added, "Pick someone else. I've already been returned 3 times." The words landed harder than any sniper's shot he'd ever dodged. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Karen shifted uncomfortably near the door. The only sound was the rain tapping against the window pane. Jack swallowed, his throat tight. "I'm sorry that happened to you." Emma's pencil stopped moving. "You didn't do it." "I know, still." He hesitated. "I'd like to know you, that's all." Emma finally glanced at him, quick, assessing. Then she reached down and patted the turtle on her lap. "You can talk to him instead. He listens better." Jack gave a slow smile. "That's fine. Ranger and I talked to a stuffed moose at home. He's a terrible listener." Ranger, as if understanding, shifted forward and laid his head gently on the armrest of Emma's wheelchair. His fur brushed her small hand. She froze. Karen started to intervene, but Jack raised a quiet hand, stopping her. Emma's fingers twitched once, then slowly came to rest on the dog's head. The air in the room changed, less sterile, more human. Emma whispered, almost to herself, "He's warm." Jack nodded. "Yeah, he's been through a lot. Like me." "Like me too?" He looked at her, really looked, at the tiny scars near her spine where the brace met skin, at the brave tilt of her chin. "Yeah," he said finally. "Like you too." By the time Karen checked her watch, nearly an hour had passed. The meeting had been scheduled for 15 minutes. When Jack stood to leave, Emma handed him the page she'd been drawing. It was a rough sketch of a man with square shoulders, a tall dog beside him, and a small wheelchair under a crooked sun. "You can take it," she said quietly, eyes still on her paper, "so you don't forget what I look like when you change your mind." Jack took the drawing carefully, as if it were glass. "I'm coming back," he said. Emma didn't answer. She turned her wheelchair slightly toward the window, the sunlight pooling over her knees. "People always can," she murmured. "It's the staying that's hard." Jack stood in silence for a moment. Then he and Ranger turned toward the hallway. Outside, the rain was still falling, but somehow it felt different now. When the door closed behind them, Ranger glanced up, ears perked. Jack exhaled, long and uneven. "I know, buddy," he whispered, reaching down to scratch behind the shepherd's ear. "We're not walking away this time." The second visit to Harbor Ridge felt less like walking into an institution and more like stepping into a test Jack Walker didn't know he was taking. He'd parked his old pickup under a tree still dripping from the night's rain. The morning air smelled of wet cedar, and his boots sank slightly in the muddy ground. Ranger trotted beside him, steady, calm, tail low. The shepherd had aged well, though the gray on his muzzle had spread since their Navy days. His dark coat still shone under the weak sun, and his eyes carried that sharp, alert focus of a soldier who'd seen too much yet refused to surrender. Inside, Karen Lee was waiting by the reception desk, clipboard in hand. She was dressed in her usual muted tones, a soft beige cardigan and dark jeans. The light caught faint lines near her mouth, the kind carved by both laughter and long nights of worry. She gave a polite nod. "You're early," she said. "Emma's still finishing her art class." "That's good. She likes routine." Jack nodded. "So do I." Karen studied him for a moment. "How's Ranger handling being around kids again?" Jack glanced at his partner. "Better than I am." Her lips twitched into the hint of a smile. "Good answer." She gestured toward the hallway. "Let's try keeping today simple. A walk, maybe some fresh air in the park. Less pressure." The park behind Harbor Ridge was quiet that morning. The trees framed a paved path that looped around a duck pond. The sky was pale blue, one of those brief, forgiving days Tacoma occasionally offered between storms. Emma waited near the bench, bundled in a light jacket. A purple scarf looped twice around her small neck. Her hair was pulled back into two uneven pigtails, and a faint smudge of paint streaked her left cheek. The wheelchair seemed slightly oversized for her, the galaxy-pattern tape on its rims shining under the sun. When she saw Jack and Ranger approach, she didn't smile, but she didn't look away either. That was progress. "Hey, Emma," Jack greeted softly. "You ready to give Ranger another chance?" Her eyes flicked toward the shepherd. "He didn't mess up last time." "That's true," Jack said. "He's better at first impressions than I am." For a second, she looked like she might respond, but instead, she focused on adjusting the small blanket over her lap. Karen joined them, standing a few feet away, clipboard tucked under her arm. "Why don't we start with a short lap around the pond?" "I'll stay behind a bit," she said gently. Jack crouched near the wheelchair handles. "You okay with that?" Emma shrugged. "As long as you don't talk too much." Jack grinned. "Deal." Ranger trotted beside them as they started down the path. Ducks quacked softly near the pond's edge, and the breeze stirred fallen leaves into little spirals around the wheels. Jack kept his pace slow, careful. Halfway around the loop, a child's stray soccer ball rolled toward the path. Jack barely noticed it, but Ranger's ears perked. The dog's instinct kicked in. He stepped forward quickly, brushing the wheelchair slightly. The wheel hit the edge of a small curb. Emma's chair tilted just enough to make her gasp. Jack was already there, hands firm on the handles before the chair could tip. "Whoa," he said quietly. "Got you." Emma's face had gone pale. Her hands gripped the blanket tightly. "It's fine," Karen said from a distance, voice steady but tense. Jack crouched again, his voice low, calm. "You're okay, Emma. We'll stop here for a bit, all right?" She shook her head. "Don't say that word." "What word?" "Safe," she whispered. "Everyone says that right before they leave." Jack froze. The words hit something deep, something that echoed through the hollow places inside him. He didn't say he was sorry. He didn't promise anything. Instead, he sat down on the path beside her, one knee bent, letting Ranger settle between them. The shepherd's head rested gently on Emma's shoe. Jack picked up a small stick and drew lazy circles in the dirt. "All right," he said quietly. "No promises. Just sitting." Emma looked at him sideways. "You talk weird." He smiled faintly. "I used to shout a lot. It got boring." For a while they sat there, the veteran, the girl, and the dog, all in silence except for the distant chatter of ducks and the faint hum of city noise beyond the trees. Then, from across the field, a deep, cheerful voice called out, "Hey, you brought backup today." Jack turned to see Miguel Ortiz, a broad-shouldered man in his mid-30s, maneuvering his wheelchair toward them. Miguel's skin was a warm bronze, his hair close-cropped, and a thick beard framed his grin. His left pant leg was neatly pinned, ending just above the knee. Despite the missing limb, he radiated energy, easy laughter, quick wit, the confidence of someone who'd rebuilt himself piece by piece. He stopped beside them, spinning his wheelchair in a playful circle. "You must be Emma," he said. "I've heard you draw better than most of my players shoot." Emma blinked, unsure how to respond. "Who told you that?" "Karen," he said. "She's my spy." Karen, standing nearby, shook her head with an amused sigh. Miguel leaned forward slightly. "You know, I run a wheelchair basketball group here on weekends. Kids your age, all troublemakers. You'd fit right in." Emma frowned. "I don't play sports." "That's okay," Miguel said easily. "Half my team doesn't either. They just come for the snacks and to make fun of my coaching." The girl's lips curved just barely upward. "You sound bad at it." Miguel clapped a hand against his chest dramatically. "Wounded. That's a direct hit. I might need Ranger to defend my honor." At that, Ranger wagged his tail, and Emma giggled, short, quiet, but unmistakably real. Karen caught Jack's eye and smiled. It was the first time she had seen Emma laugh with a stranger. After a while, the group continued their walk, with Miguel rolling beside them, telling wild stories about his team's epic pizza debates and illegal hot chocolate tournaments. Emma listened with bright eyes, occasionally asking a question, her guard slowly lowering with each turn of the path. When the sun began to dip, Karen called it a day. Jack loaded Ranger into the truck, but before he could close the door, Emma wheeled up beside him. She reached out and scratched behind Ranger's ear. "You can bring him again," she said softly. Jack looked down at her, surprised. Just him? Her mouth twitched. You too, I guess. But don't talk too much. He smiled. I'll try. The photo appeared on a Sunday afternoon. It showed Jack Walker, wearing his usual flannel and jeans, crouched beside Emma Brooks on the cracked concrete of Miguel's basketball court. Ranger sat between them, tongue out, eyes bright. Emma was laughing, head tilted back, her curls glowing in the sunlight. It was a picture no one had expected. A war-hardened SEAL, a little girl in a wheelchair, and a battle-scarred German shepherd sharing something ordinary. By Monday morning, the picture was everywhere. Local news called it "The Veteran and the Girl Who Found Hope." But the internet, as it always did, split in half. Some called it beautiful. Others called it a performance. One comment read, "Classic guilt trip, guy with PTSD trying to buy redemption." Another, "Don't let him near that kid. War heroes don't make good fathers." Jack saw the headlines while waiting at a red light, the phone buzzing on the passenger seat. Ranger rested his head on the console, watching him carefully. "Don't look at me like that," Jack muttered, silencing the screen. "I didn't ask for this." Ranger huffed softly, a sound halfway between a sigh and a growl, as if to say he didn't believe him. At Harbor Ridge, Karen Lee sat at her desk surrounded by news clippings. Her brow was furrowed, her neat handwriting filling pages of reports. She had always been meticulous, but lately she carried herself with the fatigue of someone constantly fighting fires she hadn't started. When Jack arrived, she didn't bother with pleasantries. "You saw it?" she asked. He nodded. "Hard to miss." "They're digging into your records," Karen said quietly. "Someone tipped the press about your discharge, about the PTSD." Jack's jaw tightened. "That's public record." "Not the classified parts," she said. "Someone made an effort." Jack didn't ask who. He didn't need to. That afternoon, he found out. A letter arrived. Official stationery, stamped with the seal of the Washington Child Welfare Board. It was a notice of objection. The complaint came from Harold and Denise Powell, Emma's most recent foster parents. Harold, a retired accountant with a narrow face and thinning hair, was known at the center for his rigid rules and his dislike of difficult children. Denise, pale and soft-spoken, followed her husband's lead in all things. Their letter described Emma as emotionally manipulative, prone to fabricating trauma for attention. And worse, it claimed Jack was a volatile man suffering from combat-related instability, incapable of providing a consistent environment for a vulnerable child. Karen read it aloud in her office, her voice sharp with disbelief. "This is—" She stopped herself, exhaling slowly. "Jack, I'm so sorry." Jack didn't answer. His hands rested on his knees, knuckles white. Ranger, lying at his feet, lifted his head, sensing the tension. "Let them write what they want," Jack said finally. "They don't know her." "They don't know you either," Karen added softly. "That's the point," he muttered. Over the next week, the noise grew louder. A local TV crew showed up outside Harbor Ridge. Reporters leaned over fences with cameras, hoping to capture another heartwarming shot. Some even shouted questions. "Mr. Walker, is this just a PR stunt? Are you trying to fix your image, sir? Does the girl even know what she's getting into?" Jack ignored them all, but the look stung more than bullets ever had. Inside, Emma began withdrawing again. Her drawings, once bright with color, turned gray. When Jack visited, she didn't speak much. She just petted Ranger, tracing the scar on his nose. "They're saying bad things about you," she whispered one afternoon. Jack crouched beside her chair. "They said bad things about Ranger once, too." "What did he do?" "He barked too loud." That earned a small smile, faint but real. Still, the tension weighed heavy. So one evening, Jack drove past the harbor and out toward the edge of town, to a quiet neighborhood of aging homes and uncut grass. He stopped in front of a small one-story house with peeling paint and a "for sale" sign leaning crooked in the yard. It wasn't much. 2 bedrooms, a sloped roof, a yard big enough for Ranger to run. But Jack stood there for a long time, imagining wide doorways and smooth floors instead of steps. He saw Emma's chair rolling freely through the hallways, Ranger padding beside her. He bought it the next morning. The contractors arrived 3 days later, a mix of rough-handed men with tool belts and half-drunk coffee cups. One of them, Sam Delaney, a burly redhead with a sunburned neck and a tattoo of a hammer on his forearm, looked up from his clipboard. "Wheelchair access, huh?" he asked, wiping sweat from his brow. "Yeah," Jack said. "Kid yours?" Jack paused. "Not yet." Sam nodded slowly. "Gotcha. You want ramps here and here," he said, gesturing toward the porch and hallway. "What about widening the doors? Costs more." "Do it," Jack said, "and put a grab bar in the bathroom, low enough for a child." Sam scribbled notes, then gave him a curious look. "You expecting someone?" Jack ran a hand through his short hair, glancing at the house, the cracked windows, the tired siding, the ghosts waiting to be replaced. "Build it like a kid in a wheelchair will live here for the rest of her life," he said quietly. Sam nodded without another question. That night, Jack sat on the porch steps, staring out at the yard as the last light faded. The smell of fresh-cut wood lingered in the air. Ranger lay beside him, head resting on his boots. "Looks different already," Jack murmured. Ranger's tail thumped once against the porch. "Yeah, I know," Jack said. "It's not home yet, but it's a start." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out the crumpled newspaper clipping with the photo, the one that had started everything. The edges were torn now, rain-soaked, fingerprints smudged across Emma's smile. Jack folded it carefully, slid it back into his pocket, and whispered into the evening air, "They can write what they want, but we'll make something real." The street was quiet, except for the sound of crickets. Somewhere inside the half-renovated house, a beam creaked under its new weight, like the first breath of a home being rebuilt. And for the first time in weeks, Jack felt something steady again. Not victory, not redemption, just purpose. The courthouse in downtown Tacoma smelled faintly of rain and old wood. The walls were tall, the ceilings echoing every cough, every whisper of paper. Jack Walker sat at the defendant's table, shoulders straight but jaw tight, wearing the only suit he owned, dark gray, slightly wrinkled at the cuffs. He had shaved that morning, though the faint shadow of his beard still crept across his jaw. Beside him sat Ranger, his 7-year-old German shepherd, lying quietly with his chin on Jack's boot. The dog's calm presence was both anchor and armor. Across the aisle, Harold and Denise Powell, Emma's former foster parents, sat stiffly with their attorney. Harold wore a navy blazer too small for his shoulders and the pinched expression of a man used to being obeyed. Denise, pale and thin, clutched a tissue even before the proceedings began, her blonde hair pulled into a nervous bun. Their lawyer, Gregory Marsh, was in his 50s, tall and deliberate, with graying temples and an expensive tie. He exuded confidence, the kind that filled a room before he even spoke. When the judge entered, Judge Rebecca Harmon, a woman in her early 60s with sharp features softened only by the faintest smile lines, the room rose. Her silver-gray hair was pinned neatly, and her eyes carried that blend of patience and steel only decades on the bench could create. "Please be seated," she said. Her voice carried no judgment, yet every word felt like a command. Gregory Marsh stood first, adjusting his cufflinks before addressing the court. "Your Honor, today's hearing is not about heroism or sentiment. It is about suitability. My clients, Harold and Denise Powell, cared for young Emma Brooks for over a year. They wish to ensure she is placed in stable, qualified hands. Mr. Walker, while commendable for his military service, has a documented history of post-traumatic stress disorder, violent outbursts, and alcohol-related altercations. We question whether a man still haunted by war can provide the peaceful home this child requires." Jack's hands tightened on the table, the muscles in his forearms flexing beneath the fabric. Ranger stirred slightly, sensing his tension. Marsh continued, voice measured but cutting. "We sympathize with Mr. Walker's intentions. However, intentions do not equal capacity. This is not a rescue mission. It's a child's life." He gestured toward Harold and Denise. "My clients describe Emma as emotionally unstable, prone to fits of anger, resistant to authority. They did their best, but she requires specialized care." Jack's attorney, a soft-spoken woman named Laura Kincaid, rose next. Laura was in her late 30s, with chestnut hair pulled into a neat ponytail and glasses that gave her an air of quiet intelligence. She had the patience of a therapist and the posture of a soldier's daughter. "Your Honor," Laura began, her tone calm but firm, "what Mr. Marsh calls instability is actually resilience. Emma Brooks has faced abandonment 3 times by families who promised to stay. Each time she adapted, survived, and continued to hope. Mr. Walker has done what no one else has. He's shown up, again and again, without promises, without publicity." Judge Harmon nodded slowly. "We'll hear from the witnesses." Karen Lee was called first. She walked to the stand, straight-backed in her gray suit, her expression composed. Under oath, her voice carried the steady cadence of someone used to defending truth with precision. "I've worked at Harbor Ridge for 12 years, she began. "In that time, I've seen dozens of foster hopefuls. Some stay a week, some stay a year. Mr. Walker stayed. He learned Emma's medical routines, attended therapy sessions, and adapted his life entirely around her needs. He doesn't just provide care, he provides constancy. That's rare." Marsh tried to press her. "Ms. Lee, isn't it true Mr. Walker has a history of anger issues?" Karen's dark eyes didn't waver. "He has a history of war. There's a difference." A murmur rippled through the room. Next came Miguel Ortiz, rolling forward on his wheelchair. The Marine veteran cut an impressive figure, muscular arms, dark skin glinting under courtroom lights, and a thick beard framing a smile that was both disarming and defiant. His wheelchair bore a faint scuff mark on one rim, a testament to constant use. He raised his right hand to take the oath, his voice steady. "Name's Miguel Ortiz. I run a wheelchair basketball program for kids. Emma joined us last month. She's got more fight in her than most grown men I know." Laura asked, "How did Mr. Walker contribute to Emma's progress?" Miguel chuckled. "Well, first off, he didn't treat her like glass. He showed up every time. Rain, shine, bad traffic. Didn't matter. Ranger's the mascot now. And Emma? She went from refusing to touch a basketball to sinking her first shot last week. You should have seen her face, Judge. Pure fire. When Marsh tried to challenge him, Miguel leaned forward, eyes narrowing just slightly. You can say what you want about the man's demons, counselor. I've seen what he does with them. He turns them into patients. That girl trusts him. That's not therapy. That's love. Even Judge Harmon's expression softened at that. Finally, they called Emma. Karen guided her forward, wheelchair rolling quietly over the floor. The little girl was dressed in a pale yellow dress with a denim jacket, the same one Jack had bought her during their last trip to the park. Her dark curls were tied back with a ribbon. Ranger perked up as she approached, tail brushing softly against the ground. Judge Harmon leaned forward. Emma, do you know why you're here today? Emma nodded. Because grown-ups can't decide if I'm too much work. A few chuckles rippled through the gallery. The judge smiled gently. You can tell us whatever you'd like, sweetheart. Take your time. Emma looked around the courtroom, then at Jack. He didn't smile, just met her gaze, steady and sure. She took a deep breath. People always pick me, she began softly, and then they get tired. They say I'm brave or special or strong, but then they leave. Mr. Walker didn't say any of that. He didn't promise to stay. She paused, her small fingers gripping the armrest. He just stayed. Silence fell over the room, the kind that swallowed every creak, every breath. Even Marsh looked down, pretending to shuffle papers. Judge Harmon cleared her throat, her voice unsteady for the first time. Thank you, Emma. You can go back now. Emma wheeled herself toward Ranger, who stood and pressed his head gently against her knee. She smiled. Jack lowered his head, eyes stinging. He had seen comrades die in his arms without shedding a tear. But now, in a quiet courtroom, a little girl had broken through armor years in the making. For the first time, Jack didn't fight the tears. He let them fall. The morning air smelled like fresh paint and wet grass when the white van from Harbor Ridge pulled up to the curb. The sky above Tacoma was pale gold, the kind of color that promised a new season rather than just another day. Jack Walker stood on the porch of the small house he had rebuilt board by board, his hands tucked into the pockets of his jeans, his heart drumming like he was back on the tarmac before deployment. Ranger sat beside him, tail brushing the floorboards, his ears pricked toward the sound of the van's engine. The dog had been restless all morning, pacing between the porch and the gate as if he somehow understood that today was the day their world would change. When the van door opened, Emma Brooks appeared, small and radiant in a yellow dress and a denim jacket too big for her frame. Her hair, freshly brushed, glowed chestnut under the sunlight, her wheelchair gleaming as the driver helped guide it down the ramp. A familiar turtle plush rested on her lap, its single button eye catching the light. Emma looked up at the house, at the wide porch, the ramp, the ivy creeping along the railing, and whispered, "You live here?" Jack took a step forward, his throat tight. "Yeah," he said softly, "but I guess we're gonna have to start saying we live here." Ranger trotted down first, tail wagging in slow, gentle arcs. Emma reached out, her small hand brushing the dog's head, and Ranger leaned closer, letting out a low, contented rumble. The moment felt quiet, sacred, the kind of silence where everything important already made sense. Inside, the house felt alive with sunlight. The living room walls were a soft cream, The floors polished oak. The smell of sawdust still lingered faintly, mingling with the sweetness of the muffins cooling on the counter. A gift from Karen Lee, who had dropped by earlier that morning. Emma's gaze drifted around the space. The lowered countertops, the wide hallway, the framed photo of the three of them, Jack, Ranger, and her, taken by Miguel during a basketball practice. Then she saw her room. It was painted sky blue, the ceiling dotted with tiny glow-in-the-dark stars. A small bookshelf stood by the window, already filled with art supplies and sketch pads. By the bed was a framed photo of Ranger, tongue lolling, eyes bright. Emma's wheelchair glided smoothly across the floor. She looked around, speechless, until her eyes met Jack's. "You kept that picture," she said quietly. Jack nodded. "You drew it for me." She ran her fingers along the frame, then smiled. "Guess I did." That evening, after the last of the Harbor Ridge staff had left and the sun had sunk behind the hills, Jack made dinner, mac and cheese, the only dish he could manage without supervision. Emma laughed at the mess he created, the cheese dripping down his sleeve, and Ranger sat nearby, hopeful for any scraps. They ate at the small table near the window, while the cicadas hummed outside. Over the next few weeks, the house settled into a rhythm. Ranger slept beside Emma's bed each night, his steady breathing like a lullaby. Mornings were filled with therapy routines, Jack learning how to adjust braces, measure medications, and keep up with school schedules. Every mistake he made turned into a lesson, every small success a victory. Emma, once guarded and distant, began to hum while she painted or read. Miguel Ortiz became their weekend visitor. His broad grin and deep voice filled the house whenever he rolled up the driveway in his modified van. He'd bring basketballs, pizza, and laughter. He teased Jack mercilessly. "You handle kids like you handle missions, brother. Too much strategy, not enough snacks." And Emma adored every minute of it. Together, they practiced wheelchair basketball in the backyard, with Ranger serving as both mascot and unlicensed referee. Karen Lee visited often too, but no longer as a caseworker. She'd shed the professional calm for a softness Jack hadn't seen before, often bringing Emma new art supplies or a plant for the garden. Her dark hair, once tied back in tidy buns, now fell freely past her shoulders when she came by after hours. "You've done something rare, Jack," she said one afternoon while watching Emma and Miguel laugh in the yard. "You turned paperwork into family." Jack chuckled. "Didn't do it alone." Karen smiled faintly. "No one ever does." Months slipped into seasons. The garden bloomed, daffodils, sunflowers, even a stubborn rose bush that refused to die despite Tacoma's unpredictable weather. One day, while planting seeds, Emma pointed to a yellow bloom and said, "This one's Anna." Jack froze. "Who told you about Anna?" "No one," Emma said simply. "I just knew. It's a name that sounds like something that comes back." He couldn't answer right away. He only nodded, pressing soil around the flower's base, the memory of his sister's laughter echoing somewhere deep inside him. By spring, Emma's art had become her world. She spent hours in her room sketching Ranger's expressions, Miguel's laughter, even Jack's crooked smile. When her school announced an art showcase for children with special needs, she spent weeks preparing a single painting. Jack wasn't allowed to see it. "It's a surprise," she said every time he asked. The showcase was held at the local community hall, its high ceilings strung with paper lanterns and laughter. Parents, teachers, and volunteers filled the room, the air buzzing with pride and paint. Emma rolled onto the small stage when her name was called, her hands steady on the wheels. The curtain drew back to reveal her painting, a large canvas filled with soft hues of gold and blue. At its center stood a man in a flannel shirt beside a German shepherd, with a little girl in a wheelchair reaching toward a sky full of stars. The title read, "People Who Stay." The applause that followed was thunderous. But Emma wasn't looking at the crowd. Her eyes searched only for one face. When she found Jack, he was already standing, clapping slowly, his throat tight with pride. Later, in the quiet drive home, Emma leaned her head against the window, the city lights reflecting in her eyes. "Hey, Jack," she said softly. "Yeah? Next time someone asks who you are, just tell them you're my dad." Jack glanced at her, his lips trembling into a smile. "Deal." From the back seat, Ranger gave a low huff, as if sealing the promise. They drove in silence after that, the hum of the tires blending with the rhythm of the night. The moon hung low, and the streetlights blurred into golden streak across the windshield. Ahead, the little house waited, its windows glowing softly against the dark. When they arrived, Emma wheeled herself up the ramp without help. Ranger followed, pausing at the door to look back at Jack. "Go on," Jack said, his voice rough with something that wasn't sadness anymore. Inside, Emma disappeared down the hall, her laughter echoing faintly. Jack lingered on the porch, hands in his pockets, staring up at the quiet sky. He thought of everything: the courtroom, the headlines, the doubts, and realized that the house no longer felt empty. Behind him, Ranger nudged open the door and barked once, softly, like an invitation. Jack smiled, stepping inside. The porch light flickered once, then steadied. Outside, the daffodils swayed in the wind, and somewhere deep in the quiet, a voice, or maybe just a memory, whispered, "Some people stay."